Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Finding Financial Fitness Show. I'm your host, Nino Gonzalez, joined by my co-host once again, Pei Chen. Pei, hello from the nap room, correct?
Yes, this is the purposely built dark room so that should we want to recharge, we have the ability to during the day because there's so much going on outside. It's hard to do so. So yes, this is the theater slash nap room.
It's the theater, right? I mean, more than anything, it has you kind of see a little bit. Again, if you're not on YouTube, tune in so you can see Pei's theater room, which is actually super cool. It's really cool in person to see and how dark it gets. But yes, there is a tendency, as with most movie theaters, for people to fall asleep, right? When they're watching movies, and I'm guilty of it. I think we all are, which is what we wanted to talk about today was sleep. And I think it's crazy. We're 42, 43 episodes in, and this is the first time we are maybe even mentioning sleep. I know we've talked about my routine in the past. We've talked about just routines that make us successful or have made successful people. And I think I'm going to go out and say, when it comes to fitness and finance, the most underrated thing that people miss is sleep, 100%. And so I really wanted to touch into that. I want to touch about cultural things when it comes to sleep. I want to talk about maybe preconceptions when it comes to sleep, how there's this mindset of like, I'll sleep when I'm dead, which has been completely debunked. But again, as anytime we talk about financial advice, we always have to caveat it by saying this is not legal or financial advice. And when it comes to the fitness and the health side of it, we need to caveat by saying like, hey, if you have a medical condition, a sleep disorder, we're not trying to give advice for that. We're giving just blanket recommendations, general advice for improving sleep, maintaining sleep, and the importance of sleep. So I just want to caveat that because that's a huge thing. If you have sleep apnea, we want to make sure we're getting that out there. So sleep. All right. I'm currently in the process of reading. This is why it's near and dear to me right now. A book called Why We Sleep by Alan Walker. So Dr. Alan Walker, I should say, at Stanford. So I'm going to share kind of my personal history with sleep because I think it will give people an insight on why I think I'm personally very fascinated about sleep. So me, myself, I have struggled with sleep since I was probably 12, 13. At the time, I didn't really know what it was. At the time, all I knew is that I really struggled to fall asleep and I never understood why. I've always, for as long as I can remember, been a what's called a morning person, if you will. So I'm not a night owl. So I'm going to kind of show there's like four phases. I'm going to sidetrack here. There's like four types of sleepers out there. Okay. And you probably know the two extremes. You probably know the early risers, which are the people who go to bed at 8, 9 p.m. naturally, right? They're not forcing themselves to go at that time. And they wake up without an alarm at 4:30 or 5 in the morning. The opposite side of the spectrum, you have the night owls, which are the people who naturally will go to sleep at 1, 2 in the morning and don't wake up until 10 or 11. Like that's, if you gave them, society didn't tell them they had to go to work at a certain time, that's the time they would sleep. And then there's two more patterns in between: the people that go to sleep around 10 p.m. and then the people that will go to sleep around 11 p.m. or midnight and then wake up 8 hours later. So most Americans and most of the world falls into the middle two categories. So I myself am and have always been more of an early sleeper. But I remember as I was like a teenager, and of course your sleep changes throughout as an infant, as a teenager, as a young adult, as a senior, your sleep is always going to change in terms of how and when you go to sleep. But I remember for the longest time, I always struggled with sleep. And when I would struggle with anxiety or have anxious thoughts, that would always present itself with sleep. And I remember always not being able to fall asleep and then waking up the next morning just being super frustrated because I was tossing and turning, and then I get my days not the same. I will wake up, I'm exhausted, and my workouts aren't the same. My energy levels with social, whether I was in school or maybe when I started working, my energy levels just were not the same. And so ever since then, I've always been on this quest to understand and to learn about sleep. At first, it was more pharmacological, where I was taking melatonin. That was kind of the go-to for me. It was over the counter, and I figured, okay, well, if 1 milligram works, 10 milligrams will work best. So I'll debunk that a little bit here today as well. But that's what I was kind of like my go-to melatonin. At one point, I got prescribed trazodone for sleep. Again, this is not over the counter. You have to get prescribed this medication for sleep. And that kind of did help. That's like used as a crutch for me. But there's always been this like trying to find ways of I can sleep. And I'm envious of people such as my wife and Yupe who can just like sleep without even thinking about it. Like for me, I need to have the temperature. It needs to be quiet. I need to have earplugs, eye mask. Just I need the right environment to sleep. Then there's people like my wife where it's like, bang, on the couch, gone. Just not even thinking. And you're like that as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, actually, it's very hard for me to nap because
Oh, really?
I fall into that middle category where I'm not a night owl necessarily, except for lately, maybe because of, scrolling on the phone and stuff, bad habit that's been developed. But naturally, I'm go to bed like around 11, and then I am naturally up by around 6. Like just I could force myself to stay asleep, but I'm the type that like once I'm up, I feel refreshed and I'm ready. I don't need to nap during the day. And in fact, one of the things that irritates me is to see Mike take a nap.
Why? I,
I think that's a joke with all the wives, right? The last thing that you want to see when you walk into the living room is to see your husband resting. You want him to be up doing something, tackling that honey-do list that you've given him. And I don't like to see anybody idle because I am not idle, right? So my bad, because I'm starting to learn now, like growing up in Taiwan when I was younger, in school, we had mandatory naps, right? So, after lunch, everybody, you're just like lying down on the table and put your head on the table and you nap. And it used to be a struggle for me, right? I was like, it's only a 30-minute time that we had to nap for, but it was like all the way up until like middle school. Everybody had to nap. Like the whole country shuts down for the siesta, right? And it just bothered me back then. But now I'm starting to understand it more and the science behind sleep and that even the importance of a 20-minute nap. And even for those people who can't fall asleep, the importance of just quiet and meditation in a dark environment or whatever, that 20-minute afternoon siesta, I've experienced it a couple of times when I'm actually able to fall asleep, and it's amazing. It really makes a difference, right? I just wish I can do more of it. So, yeah, it's really crazy how sleep has like it's something that nobody talks about, and you just assume everybody can sleep.
so much to unpack. And I could probably do so. Again, I want to refer people back to the Huberman Lab podcast. He has the gentleman who wrote the book, Dr. Walker. He has him on the show, and I listened to the 6-part series. Okay, 6 episodes. Each episode was 3 hours long on sleep. So an 18-hour podcast, basically on sleep, on talking about caffeine, alcohol, just a bunch of different things. So there's no way we can cover that in 45 minutes today. I'm going to just do my best to sum up the biggest takeaways, the biggest things that I've learned, the kind of key points that people can make. So one of the like questions in the book is, if someone told you that there was a drug out there that could have you perform 50% more more mental acuity, be 50% stronger, live on average 10 to 20 years longer than most people, would you take that drug? Well, most people would take that. They would buy that. They would give away all their money to buy that drug. And if it was proven in labs, like in an actual clinical trials, and was made into a drug, most people would be begging their doctor to give them this miracle cure. Yet no one focuses on the importance of sleep, because everything I just mentioned on that question, sleep does that. Sleep does that. So let's start with what you mentioned with napping, because that's, I think, a not controversial thing, but I want to start with just the general premise of the human body. We as mammals are what's called biphasic creatures. And biphasic means we tend to sleep in 2 sections, 2 portions. For all of human history, that's been the case. It's typically when you're an infant, and specifically a baby, most infants will sleep for a prolonged period of time, and then they'll have another nap, a longer nap in the afternoon. Most babies just sleep most of the time. As we get older, the duration of our sleep, our naps becomes shorter. And then typically as we get into adulthood, because of the constrictions of society, we don't really have the time to nap. But if you notice, most people, and if you're listening to this podcast, ask yourself this question: when in the middle of the afternoon do you start having what's called a crash. It's typically, depending on your nocturnal rhythm, it's probably around 12, 1 p.m., right? So it could be as late as 2 p.m., 3 p.m., depending what time you woke up. But there's this lull where you're like, you just drag. And if you have to do a conference or a speaking, or if you have to listen to someone speak at 3, 4 o'clock, good luck. It's a lot more challenging.
If you're a speaker and you're invited to speak during that time,
Yep.
you know that you're not the most important speaker.
And after lunch, right? You typically, when you go to a conference, 12 to 1 p.m. is lunchtime. And then right after, like, okay, guys, come on, we have the next speaker. No one is tuned in. Nobody is tuned in at that time. It's the most difficult speaking time to do. So we're normally biphasic creatures. Now, that being said, it's easier for some than it is for others. But as you very well mentioned, in Taiwan and Asian cultures, and definitely I'm familiar with the European cultures, that to this day, if you go to the rural parts of Italy, France, maybe not London as much, but the big countries, they will have opening hours from 9 to 1, and then they will for lunch, breakfast and lunch, and then they'll reopen from 5 to 9 or from 3 to 9, and they'll have that little siesta time in there. And all businesses are closed. I vividly remember having to deal with this going to Italy. Again, if you're in the bigger cities, it's more pronounced, more prevalent that they're going to be open. But if you're in rural towns, good luck, because they fully prioritize that. Like, that's a big thing for them. That being said, if I say this and people are like, well, that's great, Nino, but I can't nap. I have to go to work, or I work at an office. I completely understand. My number one recommendation for people who are tired throughout the day and feel lethargic, try to get a nap in. Structure a nap in wherever you can. If you have a 1 hour lunch, try to take a 30-minute nap, or 20 minutes is just as powerful. You don't want to go longer than 90, and you don't want to go shorter than 20. So 20-minute quick little nap and then go eat. It will completely set the rest of your day up, and you will have a much better day going into that second half. So try to structure in a 20-minute nap. If you work from home, even better, 20 to 30 minutes, knock it out, and you will more than likely feel refreshed. But that being said, don't force it. So if you start, and this is something I struggle with, like if I try to take a nap, 5 minutes into my nap, if I'm tossing and turning and I haven't been able to fall asleep, typically my mind is racing. All right, I'm just going to get up and I'm going to do a meditation, which is where I wanted to pivot next. If you can't take a nap, and for whatever reason in the afternoon, be it time, be it stress, be it you just don't have the energy, whatever, there's this I wouldn't call it new, because it's been around in Indian medicine for a long time. So it's called yoga nidra. And it's in English, it's very translated to deep rest is essentially what it means. And there's companies out there, again, the Huberman Lab podcast has a few of these. They're called NSDR, non-sleep deep rest. And typically when you meditate, most meditations, you're sitting there. If you have an audio guide or you're just meditating there, you're basically focusing on your breath. You're focusing on different things, but you're calm and you're immobile. Like, you're trying to minimize movement as much as possible. With NSDR, it's kind of targeted proprioception, meaning, I'll give you a kind of example of how it works. You're laying down and you want to do it guided, because unless you're like an expert on it, but you definitely want to do it guided. It's telling you, okay, take a deep breath and imagine there's a light on your feet, a light shining on your feet. Feel the sensation on the bottom of your foot or on the top of your foot, on your quad, on your leg. You're thinking about the sensation in the leg, right? And then you just move your way up through your body, whole body sensation. Then towards the end, you start moving your digits, you start moving your fingers, you start moving your hands. 10 minutes. I try to do this 10 minutes daily, 10 minutes. And if you're really entrenched in it and not thinking about anything else, that to me is more powerful than a nap. I feel like I just woke up from a night's rest where I feel, holy cow, because it feels like I was sleeping. So that's kind of a alternative option to napping. And sometimes I actually prefer to do that than napping, just because I struggle with napping. So I wanted to talk about biphasic siestas and all that first, because I think napping it's either you're pro nap or you're anti-nap. You're like, hey, you need to take a nap. Like, I encourage people to take a nap, or you're either like you, and I'm the same way with my wife. If we're watching a movie, I'm always, this girl falling asleep. Like, I'm
Yeah.
you
I have not, like, in this theater, I have not been able to finish one movie completely
that's so
at
funny.
all. Like, I'm asleep by like 30 minutes in.
And
But
sometimes with napping off, it could be that you just didn't sleep well the night before, right? If you really got a good night's sleep, the need for a nap might not be there. So I want to talk about sleep times because there's this thing of like, oh, I only need 4 hours of sleep to function. This is a lie. There's about a subset of the population, and I'm going to say it's 3 to 5% of people who have a variation on the specific gene where they actually only need about 4 to 6 hours of sleep to fully function. That's a genetic mutation in society, but a very, very small amount. Everybody, and you'll know. I mean, you'll know if you're running on 4 hours of sleep,
I heard Napoleon has that
Yeah,
gene.
correct. Napoleon was
He
one of
only
those.
needed to sleep 3 hours.
Correct. He was one of those people, and there's certain people in history that you can kind of point to, but that's not the norm. That's completely just an isolated incident. So most people will need anywhere from 7 on the minimal side to 9, maybe 10 hours, depending on your age and how old you are. So, and I'm talking about 7 to 9 hours of sleep, not time in bed. I'm talking about like eyes closed, you're in stage 1 of sleep. That is when the countdown, so to speak, starts. So most people will need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So right off the bat, before even trying to start implementing a nap, go to bed earlier. It's that simple. Either rearrange your schedule. And typically the best way to start with this is Monday through Friday. If you have an alarm, Saturday and Sunday, try to see when you would naturally wake up, right? Without any alarm. If you normally wake up during the week for work at 6 a.m., but on the weekends you sleep until 8, that means that your body is wanting to sleep until 8 every day. Ask to see if you can move around your schedule. And I know this is like a luxury, not all the options, but if you can't change your schedule, which I would highly encourage you to try to do that. If you can't, go to bed earlier. And the best way to start pushing your bedtime back a little bit is start with like 20 minutes. Don't go like you normally go to sleep at 10. Don't start trying to go to bed at 8. I promise you won't. You won't fall asleep. So if you're normally going to bed at 10 and you have to wake up at 5, that's only about 7 hours of sleep. Your goal would be to push that back to 9. So your first 5 nights, you're going to change your bedtime from 10 p.m. to 9:45. Do that for 5 nights. And then again, 9:45 to 9:30. So every 15, you're going to do 15-minute increments every 5 days. You're going to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing it back to the point where you'll finally get to 9 a.m. Then you're getting your 8 hours of sleep in.
Do you try to meditate before bedtime? Would that be something that would help an individual?
If someone struggles to fall asleep, meditation does help. NSDR, one of those sessions that I mentioned, you can find them on YouTube. I think those really do help because they generally calm the body. But a meditation practice, see, it's not as simple as saying meditate 10 minutes before bed. If you're new to meditating can be hard. And meditating can actually be frustrating if you've never done it. It can actually make you a little bit more anxious and could be counterintuitive to falling asleep. It's about having a meditation practice. I'll tell you what I do. I meditate and then I go and read a novel, just a very, book that's going to just calm me down, that I'm sucked into it, but it'll naturally make me tired. And then I'll go to bed. To me, that's kind of the best thing to do when it comes to falling asleep, because if I meditate too close, like I might fall asleep during the meditation, and then I'm negating the benefits of the meditation. And let's be real, if you're meditating in another room, or even if you meditate in bed and you have your headphones in and you fall asleep, what's going to happen in the middle of the night? Chances are you're going to wake up again because you have your headphones in. Maybe you didn't like brush your teeth. Like maybe you weren't doing it correctly, and then you fell asleep, and then you wake up in the middle of the night, and then you're going to struggle to fall back asleep.
Or you're disrupting the cycle.
Correct. So my answer to that would be, if you want to do meditation as part of a practice, yes, it could help, but get it into a practice. But if you can't fall asleep and you're struggling to fall asleep, do not spend more than 20 minutes in bed tossing and turning. If after 20 minutes, and do not sleep with your phone in your bed, but like estimate it. If you've 15, 20 minutes, you've been struggling to sleep, get out of bed, go to a different room, a different environment, and do something that's very mindless. Pick up an audiobook that you can just lay down, preferably in a dark room, and just listen to the audiobook. Listen to a soothing podcast, not this one because we talk about money, but listen to a podcast, listen to something that's going to calm you. Go read a book, not a stimulating book, just like a novel.
Don't read the IBC book.
Do not read Becoming Your Own Banker. Yeah. Take a bath, take a warm bath, do something that's going to just calm you down, and don't go back to the room. until you start feeling sleepy. Because what will happen is there's this thing with sleep known as sleep association. And if you struggle to fall asleep in bed and you stay in bed tossing and turning for hours, and then you eventually fall asleep, the next night, and I'm guilty, I've experienced this. The next night when you go to bed, your brain is going to have this association with that same bedroom of, oh man, I struggled to fall asleep. So you want to disassociate the stress and the anxiety with falling asleep with your bedroom. So make sure if you can't fall asleep, get out of the bedroom and go to another room to go read. Do something, do some low stimulation activity until you get sleepy, and then go back to bed and or try to go back to sleep again. Or if you have another, like let's say in your room, you have your room where you watch TV, you have your movie theater, and maybe it's easier for you to fall asleep there. There's nothing wrong with that. Go sleep there. If you fall asleep there, great. Maybe the next night, instead of going back to your room, you go back to your same theater and try to fall asleep again. Maybe it takes you 4 or 5 nights of sleeping in that room, of getting good night's rest, to get the confidence to go back to your bedroom.
So here's a segue to that. Are you familiar with the Wim Hof, like the breathing technique?
Yes. Similar to meditation. I like the Wim Hof breathing, but it's another way to calm you down. But there's any breathing technique that slows your heart rate is going to have, if your problem, let me rephrase this. If your problem with falling asleep is anxious thoughts and your irregular heart rate and your breathing is sped up, try any type of breathing technique. You could do like a 4-6, so 4 seconds in through your nose, or count of 4 through your nose, and then a count of 6 on the exhale. Any breathing technique that you do, the whole point is to slow down the exhale, because slowing down the exhale will slow down your respiration rate, and that will calm you down. So yes, the Wim Hof breathing I fully like, but there's so many breathing methods out there. You got to find what works for you. Some of them get me lightheaded. If I try to, again, always being extra at everything, if I try to overdo it, and I'm like passing out over, like, holy cow,
holding your breath.
So trying different breathing techniques that work for you, by all means. These are all little, I guess you can call them hacks on how to kind of improve your sleep. But go ahead, were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say it's for people like me, right, who doesn't have problem sleeping. It's amazing to see this. And actually, in fact, I see that in my own daughter. She has very, like, she's like you, she's sleep challenged, I would say. And like, I struggle to find ways to help her, because I'm like, what's your problem? Just like go lie down in the bed and you sleep, right? Like,
oh my goodness. See, it's funny because we're the complete opposite, right? So like I believe, and from what I've seen, it's in the book that I was reading, 90% of people will struggle with sleep at some point in their lives, right? At some point. Maybe you're not going through it right now. Maybe it's consistent, but maybe you had struggled with it in the past, or maybe you will in the future. So these are kind of easy techniques. But so going back to the sleep and the trouble with falling asleep. So oftentimes people will try Wim Hof breathing, different breathing techniques, different meditations, and they're like, man, these things suck. None of them work. Well, I'll tell you why they don't work. It's your wind down routine. So I firmly believe every person, I don't care how good you sleep, because no matter if you fall asleep good and you sleep 8 hours, what's the most important thing is the quality of your sleep. And the quality of your sleep is determined by your preparation for sleep. So that's what I wanted to get into, was your sleep routine before you go to bed. So simple rule, 10, 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to break this down. 10 hours before sleep, no caffeine. I'll get into caffeine in a little bit. 3 hours before bed, no food. 2 hours before bed, no water. And 1 hour before bed, no screen exposure. And I would then, and that 1 hour before, I'm putting an asterisk next to that number. I don't like that one. I would say 2 hours, because even 1 hour before bed is too much. So that's a simple barometer that you can use. If you're struggling to fall asleep, you got to start there. Start with those 4 things. See if that works. The next thing is your sleep environment. All right. So phone use, as I mentioned, 1 hour before, don't use your phone. I would say 2 to 3 hours before, even if you're using your phone, do not go on social media. Do not do anything that's mentally stimulating. And this could be the same thing. Don't try to read an IBC book. Don't have your whiteboard out trying to draw all these strategies of how you're going to become a millionaire, because I promise you, from speaking from experience, you will not fall asleep, because this stuff will go ruminate in your brain. So low stimulus activities, specifically get off your phone. Do something that's very calming. I am a huge proponent of reading. I love reading. I think reading is one of the easiest things. But you can watch TV. I know that's a screen, but if you can have like a blue light filter on, maybe you have those blue light filter glasses, that will help with the resolution coming from the screen, that it won't activate your brain as much. So something that's very calming. That's one thing. Second thing is light. And I mentioned this with the TVs a little bit. What you hear about blue light is absolutely true, that blue light acts as a wake up, if you will. That's why one of the first things you want to do in the morning is have blue light. But at night, you want to have very light to no light, light. So what I mean by that is like candlelight. So because of our human evolution, we've been using fire for thousands of years, that we as humans have been able to go to sleep with that light, and it's almost like a soothing light. So for example, I have a ring light in front of my face, and so do you, Pei. It's a bright white light. I don't want to use that before bed. You want to use like a very dim orange type tint to it. Ideally, if you have a dimmer, you can dim it down the closer you get to bed. And the reason for this, the reason why light plays a huge thing, is because of what's known as melatonin. And many people have heard of exogenous melatonin, which is what you take, but you have melatonin in your own body. Melatonin is released in your body when it typically starts getting dark. So melatonin is in sync with what's known as your circadian rhythm. So as it starts getting dark, your melatonin levels will peak, and you will have the peak melatonin levels right before you go to bed. When you have that rise in melatonin, that calms your body, that calms your brain, and that naturally allows you to fall asleep. Side note on this, exogenous melatonin for sleep has not been proven to be clinically beneficial in just the generic population until only for two reasons. One, in the senior living, so ages 60, 70, 80, or if you're trying to get adjusted to jet lag. And I can come back to that. But if your melatonin is not the answer, and as someone who took melatonin chronically for 10 years, it's not the answer. The reason why melatonin will work is because of the placebo effect, right? You're taking something and you're thinking it's going to work. And there's been randomized control trials that have proven this, where they'll give someone melatonin and they'll give another group not melatonin, but they've been told they've been given melatonin and they fall asleep better. So
it could be conditioning, right? Like you were saying about how if you go to your bed and you're tossing and turning, you're being kind of conditioned like this is a struggle, and the reaction is adverse reaction. But if you're conditioning yourself, even if you just take like it's a gummy, it's not really anything. If you take it and you associate that with your bed routine, it's almost like a reaction, a signal where like, oh, once I take this, then I'm ready to go to bed. I'm going to get into my comfy pajamas. I'm going to get into my, cleanup routine, and then I'm in bed because of this signal pill, right?
That's proven. However, I will say this, when it comes to melatonin, an abuse of melatonin, like in amounts for a chronic period of time, can actually hinder your body's ability to produce melatonin naturally. So although that might be your kind of go-to, there's other things you can take, like vitamins and minerals like glycine or magnesium citrate, which don't focus too much on that. But if it's more of an association type of thing, you can take one of those things to kind of put you in that mindset, if you will. But be careful with taking exogenous melatonin. As someone who took it for well over a decade, and then I started learning more and more about the research, I actually realized how much it was harming me and reducing the amount of natural melatonin that I was producing. So light exposure, 1 to 2 hours before, start changing your environment of light. So ideally have a room where you can, or even be outside, when the night light comes out and maybe you're reading out there, you have a little mini light. If you're inside, be exposed to darkness. Be exposed to darkness, have some light, but don't have it so bright that you have no darkness exposed. Let the light naturally come in. So we're talking about, small candle lights, orange glow, things like that. Phone use at a minimal. Temperature is another huge one. So when we wake up, our body temperature, our core body temperature rises. And when we go to sleep, our core body temperature drops. So at night, your thermometer, your AC should be at its lowest because you want to get cold. It should be cold. The average, again, my thumbs up, the average temperature that's recommended for a room to sleep is about 66 to 70 degrees.
Oh, that's
And that,
super cold.
yeah, for sure. No, it is like I personally don't even sleep at that. I'm comfortable at 72 because my body temperature naturally is a little bit warmer. So cooling it down to me for and again, it's different depending on your centralized AC unit. If you have one just vent that's just blowing on your bed, obviously it's a little bit different. But about 66 to 70, you want it to be cold because then you can control the covers that you have on, right? If in the middle of the night you start getting hot, you can remove yourself of a cover. But if you're going like leading up to bed, leading up to that hour before bed, you want to stop dropping your body temperature, like start dropping your body temperature. And one way you can do that is obviously through the AC and controlling your environment. Another way you can do it is by taking a hot shower. Why does that work? You would think, well, you just said we want to avoid heat, correct? But with when you take a really, really hot shower and you have the AC pretty cold and you jump out, what happens? You get cold. Your extremity. So even if you don't take a hot shower, just wash your hands. Wash your hands like with really, really hot water, and you're going to get your extremities really warm. What that does, it diverts blood flow. It diverts blood flow away from your central system to your hands and to your feet. And what that does is it drops your core body temperature. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to drop our core body temperature to be cold. And when we do that, that makes it more of a conducive to a sleep environment. Our body knows, okay, it's time to go to bed. You don't want to do it too cold, right? Because if it's too cold and you're freezing and you don't have blankets, that's going to keep you awake.
Right. You're shivering and trying to exert energy to, yeah.
Correct.
Right.
You're like, but that's where you can have blankets to help trap the body heat. Because that's all a blanket that really does is it traps body heat. Because again, if you're not watching on YouTube, but if you're laying here and your blanket's on top of you, what it does is you can imagine the heat waves go up. What that blanket does is it keeps that heat trapped in, and it just goes back to your body. So that's essentially how a blanket works. And that's where sleeping with the blanket can be beneficial if you're sleeping at the right temperature. So again, temperature, nighttime, light exposure. All right. One of the best ways to get a good night's sleep is to prepare the next morning. So if you want to get a good night's sleep the next day, it all starts the moment you wake up. All right. As I mentioned about having a nighttime routine, right? So let's say 3 hours before you have dinner, 2 hours before you're watching TV, and then 1 hour before you're in your bed or you're in another room. Don't do this in your bed. If you're reading, don't read in your bed. Again, the bed should only be associated with sleep. If you're going to read, have a little office, a little nook where you're going to read. If you're going to listen to a podcast, have your spot where you're just going to do that for your wind down for an hour. Have your bedtime routine, but also have a morning routine. If the moment you wake up and the first thing you do, which is what most people do, is grab your phone and go on social media or check your emails or check your text messages, what happens? Our cortisol levels, cortisol is a stress hormone. Our cortisol levels are gradually rising in the morning. If you wake up and check social media, your cortisol is going to spike. And that's going to lead to an earlier crash and a bigger crash later on in the day. You want that cortisol to naturally progress up and up and up, and then drop, drop, and drop. You don't want it to be a big spike and a big drop. All right. Most people will pick up their phone, get on social media, go downstairs or go to the kitchen and make a cup of coffee. All right. If you're having crashes in the afternoon, don't do both of those. Avoid doing both of those. So I'll give you kind of another routine you can do. When you wake up, if you're not like a super, super morning person, and you wake up like right when if the sun's starting to come out or it's already out, one of the first things you want to do is when you get out of bed, go brush your teeth, go use the restroom. That's why you don't want to drink too much water before because you don't want to wake up in the middle of the night, but go do what you got to do. Then immediately go outside and go on a 10-minute walk. The moment you get out of bed, no sunglasses. You want to have sunlight exposure. Please don't take this to the extreme and walk outside and be like, looking at the sun. Like don't injure your eyeballs by doing that. But the first thing you want to do is get up and get sunlight exposure. Why? Our bodies have an internal clock known as our circadian rhythm, right? If you are in a dark environment and you stay in a dark environment when you wake up and you have this artificial light beaming in your eyes, our bodies are not programmed, nor are they used to what that is. So it puts us on high alert. But by getting sunlight exposure right away, first thing in the morning for 10 minutes, it resets and awakens your circadian rhythm in a very gentle way. So one of the best things is light exposure. Another thing you can do that really does help is exercise, which is why I say do the walk. because walking a 10-minute walk is your form of exercise. But if you don't want to do that, if you want to do yoga, by all means, go outside and do yoga, or do some yoga and then go sit outside for a little bit while you drink some tea or drink your coffee. Get some light exposure. Ideally, you'd have your coffee after, but get some light exposure, do some sort of exercise, and then calm your mind a little bit. Take a little bit longer of peace in the morning before you get to the craziness of the day. So, right, like don't check your emails, don't check your texts, just wake up, go on a 10-minute walk, get some light exposure, come back, sit down, drink some water, have a glass of water, have some electrolytes. Maybe if you want to replenish, if you feel a little bit dehydrated, sit down, maybe read a book. Maybe you want to start having your first meal already, like ease into your day. Then when you're ready mentally, then go check your emails, then go check your text messages.
You almost are doing a PSA for having dogs.
Yes, exactly. That's what I do.
Because you have to, right? Like it's you get up. The first thing is you have to take them out to do their thing. Then you might as well just go for a walk with them and whatnot. Now, what do you do if you're like a natural, like for example, someone like you wake up super early before the sun is even out?
I will still go on a walk because I have my dogs, and I will just go take the dogs for a walk, because that's, and what I will do though, is when I come back is I will turn on lights in my house. So you can mimic the sun's light inside the house. I'll turn on, I won't keep it dark. Remember I mentioned like having a light switch dimmer before you go to bed. Well, before I go to bed, I have that same dimmer lower, but when I wake up, I have it bright, right? And then when the sun comes out, then I might go on another walk, or I might just get some light exposure to almost let my body know like, hey, it's morning. Again, it sounds voodoo-y, but it really does help. And then what I would suggest is then once, like maybe this takes you 20, 30 minutes, you brush your teeth, you drink a glass of water, you walk the dogs, you come back, maybe you do some stretching, you sit down, 20, 30 minutes. Maybe you want to journal. If you really want to take this above and beyond, maybe you start journaling for 10 minutes, have a gratitude journal, meditate for 5 minutes. You can really take that on. 30 minutes in. All right. Let's say you're hungry. Maybe you're a morning person who eats and you want to have a little bite to get your day started, have some protein, get your day going. Then you can start checking your emails, checking your stuff. Now, what's the first thing that people are going to be saying right now? I need my coffee first thing in the morning. I get it. But you got to understand that your body's programmed that way. Your body's dependent on that caffeine. And there's no other way to get over caffeine withdrawals than by slowly getting over it. Meaning, day one, if you're used to drinking your coffee within the first 10 minutes of waking, delay that to 20 minutes. Then do that for a week. Then delay it to 30 minutes. Ideally, you'd want to get it. If you struggle from afternoon crashes where you really feel it in the afternoon, a lot of that has to do, and I won't get too much into the science behind it, but what's known as our adenosine receptors. If you take caffeine too early in the morning, too close to waking up, you're stunting this adenosine, and it's just building up and building up. By the time the morning comes, the afternoon, it's just going to crash. So if you struggle from afternoon crashes, I'm not saying cut out caffeine. I drink coffee. There's nothing wrong with drinking caffeine, but just delay that caffeine up, and ideally 60 minutes to 90 minutes after waking up. So if you wake up at 6, try to have your first cup of coffee at 7:30. It will, and try it out. See how you feel. Keep a record, because what gets measured gets improved. Keep a record of how you feel at 1, 2 p.m. And if you feel like that really helped, keep doing that. A second option is substitute coffee for tea. And the reason is because, and this could be black tea, because black tea is just as fine. Black tea has a compound known as L-theanine. And what L-theanine does is it reduces the effectiveness of it first of all has less caffeine, but theanine binds to caffeine and it reduces the spike in caffeine that you're going to get. So what you'll notice with black tea is if you drink 2 cups of black tea is the equivalent of 1 cup of coffee. If you drink 2 cups of black tea, when you drink it, your caffeine spike is not going to go like this. It's going to go steady. It's going to go moderate, and then it's going to go down. If you drink coffee, within 30 minutes, it's going to be here, and then you're going to drop. And that's going to correlate with the crash, right? It's going to, because what goes up must come down. So if you're drinking caffeine, it's going to follow with a crash. On this note, if you're going to Starbucks and you're getting a latte with like 10 tablespoons of sugar, you are setting yourself up for failure, because you're getting caffeine, which is going to spike, and you're getting your sugar, which is going to spike. By the time those two crash, oh my goodness, you are going to want to knock out. And this is what happens with most people. Once that caffeine leaves, once that sugar leaves, it's you're setting yourself up. That's why one of the best things to get into your system in the morning is protein, because protein takes longer to digest. And by having protein in your system or carbohydrates, ideally whole grain carbohydrates in your system, if you have coffee with sugar, let's say, again, I'm not saying you don't need to have it, but what will happen is the sugar won't spike as much because you'll have fiber and protein there that will slow down the absorption of that sugar and also the caffeine. So the kick won't be as high. Now, this is different. If you wake up and you are going to go, if you're the first thing you're doing is exercise, like rigorous exercise, being weight training or going for a run, by all means, you can have your coffee right away. If you wake up and in 30 minutes you're at the gym or in 30 minutes you're running, take your caffeine, your coffee, your pre-workout, because what are you going to do? You're going to go burn that caffeine right away. It's not just sitting in your bloodstream. It's going to be diverted to your muscles to fuel your workout. So that's the only exception to that rule. So nighttime routine, morning routine.
I think I tried it. I think we kind of touched on this a little bit in one of the previous episode where we talked about not taking caffeine right away in the morning. Yeah. And I've been kind of incorporating that because it became a routine, right? You just go to the coffee, you're like a zombie and you're not even paying attention. So like I've started to do that, and it's actually better. Like I'm actually taking in less caffeine than I normally do. Like I barely can finish a whole cup now. That's just because I just delay it. It's not like I change anything that I put in my coffee. Just by delaying it, I'm taking less in.
That's exactly what would happen with me. I remember my typical routine would be I'd wake up at 5. I had my first cup of coffee at 5:30. 9 a.m. came, 10 a.m. Oh my goodness, I'm struggling. When I was working, I was like, oh my, and I needed another cup. So then I would go get another cup of coffee. Then in the afternoon, maybe around 1 or 2 is when I would go work out. Well, then I would take maybe some pre-workout or maybe another cup of coffee. Then once I delayed the onset of my caffeine to, let's say 7 a.m., 2 hours after I woke up, then, and even if maybe now it's tea, but back then it was coffee. Again, you want to, if you're going to, caffeine is a drug. If you're going to wean off caffeine, you want to wean off of it slowly. Otherwise you'll get really bad headaches. But if I had my first cup at 7, I would notice that I wouldn't need another cup to get through that later morning half. And then by the time it came to my workout, then I would just have my pre-workout caffeine source there. And I felt more stable. And I time it that way because then typically after I work out, like I'll have my pre-workout, I'll go lift pretty rigorously. Then afterwards, I'll have a high carb meal to help replenish. But then afterwards, after that, my wind down routine. I know everybody makes fun of me for this, but my wind down routine starts around 5, 6 p.m. Like I like to just chill, watch TV with the wife, I love reading, read a book. Like I love my nighttime routine. By that point, like I'm back from the gym by 2 or 3. I only have 2 more hours before my wind down routine. I'm okay with that crash coming down because it coincides with me naturally, mentally just slowing down.
You do realize that you have a blessed, charmed life, right? Because most people don't even get home till 6. Yes. And here's Nino already grabbing his comfy blanket, ready to go to bed.
I'm well aware of that. And again, this is where people will always say, like, what's money going to afford you? Like, what does money allow you to do? It's controlling my time. And again, I want to keep in mind, like all of these suggestions and all of these recommendations, I'm mindful of the fact that, look, if your alarm is at 5 a.m. because you got to leave for work at 6, it is what it is. Like there's not so much you can do, but you have options. Like I've known plenty of people who will adjust their routine such that they will have an extra 30 minutes in the morning so that they can then wake up slowly, wake up just at ease. If you wake up and the first thing you're doing is stressing, what are you doing? You're setting yourself up for the whole day to stress. You're going to be on edge the whole day. And as someone who has dealt with anxiety, who has dealt with these issues, I'm speaking from experience. So if I can do something to slow down my brain just for a little bit, just for 5-10 minutes, the compounding effects of that are going to be huge for my whole day. So even if that means wake up 10 minutes earlier, get out of bed, and just go on a 5-minute walk, or just maybe don't even go on a walk, maybe just sit on the couch and drink your water. Like people really do struggle with just being, and this is why meditation helps, but people really do struggle with just being able to just be still and do nothing. Like just be with your thoughts, because trust me, you don't need social media or your emails to stimulate your mind. If you just sit there with your thoughts, your brain is going to have plenty of thoughts, and you have to let your brain run wild at times. Like let it get everything out. Let it just brain dump and just sit there and be like, where is this thought coming from? Like, what is this thought? Oh, because then as you start clearing the haze, that's when creativity comes in. That's when you start having good ideas. That's when you start having positive thinking. So it's really, there's a lot to, again, you're right, Pei, in the sense that like, I know it's a luxury that I have, and I'm not missing on that fact.
Well,
But
my point of bringing that up is that everything that you pointed out, it's not like you have to do everything all at once, right? I mentioned like every time when we have these conversations, I take one or two things that I feel like, hey, you know what, let me give it a try and implement it. And just a small like change of one little behavior can have compounding effect. I personally have experience. We've been doing these conversations or podcasts for a good couple months now, and I haven't implemented everything that we talked about or you suggested, but I often just pick one or two that I feel like it's easy for me to just incorporate, or a little change that I can do. And it's almost like having a coach, right? Sometimes a little nugget from your coach that tells you what to do, and you just implement, like it's just an angle of your elbow as you shoot your basketball or whatever, that can make a huge difference. So just kind of want to put it out there. We can't do everything all at once, but just one thing at a time makes a huge difference.
I agree. And they're just, again, and the whole purpose of this episode was I firmly believe that sleep is the most underrated thing. I do think
Misunderstood a lot too.
Yeah, for sure. And the one more point, because I know I mentioned about the caffeine in the beginning. So caffeine has what's called a half-life of 10 hours, meaning after you take caffeine, like let's say you drink a cup of coffee, and a cup of coffee typically has 100 milligrams of caffeine. Could be more, could be less. And 10 hours later, you're still going to have 50 milligrams of caffeine in your system. So if you drink coffee, if you go to bed at 10 p.m. and you have your last cup of coffee at 2, by 10 p.m., you still have about 70 milligrams of caffeine. It's the equivalent. It's the equivalent of the moment you go to bed, like right before you fall asleep, you take a shot of espresso, 70 milligrams. And there's people out there, I have family in this, who drink coffee before going to bed. I go back to what I said earlier in the show. Just because you can fall asleep and you sleep just fine doesn't mean the quality of sleep is good. See, sometimes people don't know what good quality sleep is until they've had it, right? So if you stop drinking, let's say, coffee before bed one time, and you realize, holy cow, I slept, like I feel refreshed, right? There's some people, myself included, there's times when I'm sleeping 8 hours and wife will ask me, like, how'd you sleep? I'm like, I slept 8 hours, but I don't feel refreshed. And if that's the case, that something went wrong during your sleep of your 8 hours. There's so many cycles. There's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, deep sleep, REM sleep. Like there's so many cycles of sleep, and each one of them have a function in our human body. So you want to maximize as much as possible for all of those stages. And so the point that I'm making is keep in mind with caffeine, and then talk about alcohol, but really quickly with alcohol, try to avoid alcohol 6-7 hours before going to bed, because alcohol will make you fall asleep faster, but will completely disrupt your REM sleep. And in REM sleep, that's when you're dreaming. If your REM sleep is disrupted, you will feel it in the morning. That's why some people, you can get the exact same amount of sleep, 8 hours, having just drank alcohol before going to bed, and you will feel completely different, let alone if you're hungover. So keep that in mind. Alcohol and caffeine. Alcohol and caffeine are the two exogenous things that we take that really will have a huge impact on our sleep. But going back to what you said, yes, sleep is underrated. Sleep is understood. And in my opinion, long are the days of people saying that I only need 4 hours of sleep to function because I'm committed to my goal. I get it. I completely get sacrificing sleep because you want to go pick up an extra shift. We've encouraged people to, pick up extra shift to fund their stacks. But no matter what, sleep should never be the first thing to go. I promise you there's more things throughout your day that you're doing, be it on your phone, be it social media, be it emails, be it unhealthy behaviors, that you can take time away from, as opposed to taking time away from sleep. Sleep should be the exact last thing that you even think about sacrificing time from, because I promise you a good night of sleep will have monumental impacts on your life. And consequently, a poor night's sleep and poor consistent sleep will hinder you more than any productivity hack you have over here. If you're sleeping 4 hours over here, and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna get this little app that's gonna help me work an extra 10 minutes or call an extra 2 clients. go get your sleep. That's going to help more benefit, way more benefit than the little hack you have.
Right. It's almost like the area of improvement where you can get the get more bang for the buck if you just improve this one area.
And in all aspects, whether you want to be rich, whatever it is, it will be huge. So, anyways, I mean, I'm fascinated by sleep. Like I said, I still struggle with sleep. I'm trying to figure the solution. I don't have the solution. The tips that I've given, there's some nights where I will follow everything to a T and I will still struggle to fall asleep. And it is what it is. And sometimes acceptance is a big part of just saying, it is what it is. It's one of those nights. And
You know what we need to also talk about? This could be a follow-up conversation. Is like since we're all into traveling and whatnot, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are into that too. The sleep disruption and how do you prepare? I know that you travel, and I always am curious for someone who can't sleep well, how do you do it? How do you go and change time zones? And it's just a huge disruption to your routine. And I know that Mike struggled with this a lot, and that's why he's not a big, huge fan of like traveling because he's just like he doesn't like the feeling of having his sleep pattern, disrupted. So yeah, that's something that just throwing it out there. We could talk about that next time.
well, if you listen to the episode on 10x travel that we had with Bryce Conway, that lie flat seats on business class can solve I'm not kidding. That's a huge, trust me, that was one of my biggest concerns whenever I would travel is like, I can't sleep on a plane. Like I just can't sleep on a plane. Then I flew business class and I realized I can sleep on a plane if I have and this is where I said melatonin just really quickly before we go. One of the best solutions is if you take melatonin before you go to sleep on a plane, you'll kind of artificially boost your melatonin, which will then, you're not going to get a full 8 hours of sleep. Like you have to just accept that going into it. That's something that I've learned a lot from my wife about acceptance, just accepting that things are the way they are. And it's like, what's the alternative? You just don't go travel. You don't go see the world. That's fine. But just know that this is what comes with it. But for me, it's okay. Let me get 4 or 5 hours of sleep with some melatonin. I'm going to wake up. I'm already building the sleep pressure by the time I wake up that if I time it correctly and get adjusted to their time zone, despite it being 11 a.m. or noon my time, if I just force myself pharmacologically from a melatonin standpoint to knock out, even if it's for 4 or 5 hours, but I'm waking up at 8 a.m. Japan time or Europe time, well, then by the time I'm there, then yeah, the first day might be a little bit tough, but then I'm back on the schedule and I fall asleep and I can avoid jet lag as quick as possible. That's like my 2-minute spiel on it, but it definitely helps to have a lie flat sleep to go to bed.
So points and
it always comes back to that points and miles. So everybody, I know this was probably an unexpected topic. I mean, I'm sure when you clicked on this episode, you're like, okay, they're going to be talking about sleep. I wonder what they are going to be mentioning. There's a lot to be said about sleep, and this is a whole thing you can get into if you truly wanted to learn more about sleep, and maybe at a later time we'll have another episode discussing it. But I know for me, it's fun to talk about just because it reaffirms what I've learned and makes me value even more so the importance of sleep. So I hope, Pei, you got something out of this. I hope our listeners did as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all full circle, right? Everything that's happening to us and helps us enhance our performance. We're going to talk about it.
Yep, I agree. All right, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in to this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. Take care.